Hello and welcome to another episode of Flower Breeding. In this episode, we'll talk about the discovery, history, and breeding of marigolds. First, we'll cover two phenomena. Despite their common names, neither the French marigold nor the African marigold come from their respective namesake countries. Both species are found in Central America. The first species, Tagetes erecta, is called the African marigold because the first European herbalists thought it originated in Africa, although in this case it came from Mexico. The first introduction of marigolds to the Old World was via Spanish and Portuguese sailors who distributed them across their trade routes. For instance, Portugal often traded with North Africa, and trouble between Spain and Portugal was quite frequent. This would have allowed for marigolds to first arrive in Africa alongside Spain and Portugal prior to the rest of Europe, prior to the rest of the continent, giving rise to this mythos. Indeed, early European visitors to North Africa thought that the wildflowers of marigold that they found were native to those lands, rather than being escaped cultivated varieties. They were often grown as bedding plants in Iberian gardens due to the fact that they did not grow well with others in their earliest forms, being highly competitive with other plants. Now on to the history of marigolds within India. There's a large amount of religious ceremony around marigolds in India. Indeed, these festivity ornaments are made entirely of marigold. Despite this, however, marigolds were only introduced to India about 350 years ago. It is likely that, based on the work of Mr. George Watt, the primary appearance of marigold corresponds with early interactions between the Portuguese colonists of Goa and the native populace of that region. These individuals would have likely received these seeds from Central and South America, and through the colonization of India by the Portuguese, they would have spread to India from there. Now on to the breeding history. An historian named Lyman White wrote a short book about flower breeding based on his wide experience in reading. He was both a plant breeder and a historian at the time. In his autobiography, he began saying that the earliest varieties available to him at the start of his breeding program primarily consisted of a small number of single flower varieties of the quote-unquote African species, and even fewer carnation-style varieties that were far more primitive than modern varieties. This leads me to a quick digression. Tagetes patula, named the French marigold because it was believed to come from France, is likewise native to Central America, but it's unknown how it reached France. It is known to have come from sea collectors in China shortly after the discovery, but that's as far as it goes, history-wise. But by the 1920s, the French-style marigold had leaps and bounds of different breeding projects in the end of the 1920s. This was through the discovery of a new cultivar called Farbenklang. You see, typically speaking, French marigolds back in those time periods only grew well in France and their native environment due to inability to handle damp weather. Farbenklang, however, which was resold in England as Harmony, did not have this problem and could bloom in damp climates late in the season. A great many cultivars were bred from this cultivar of the French marigold. One such derivative was called Sparky, and it was bred in California, and it became the basis of several more cultivars such as Decker's, King Tut, Bodgers, and Brocklades. By the mid-1930s, various hybrid forms of marigold were being bred, both in Tagetes erecta and Tagetes patula, developing parallel breeding programs to improve each species, initially only offering 10 to 12 cultivars per year, but by 1936 that number climbed to between 40 and 50, with the 1980s being the apex, where they released 80 cultivars of marigold, almost all of which were bred by Burpee staff. Much of the breeding work was in improving flowering period, specifically lengthening the amount of flowers per season, improved hardiness, uniformity of height and increased blossom size, and of course resistance to different diseases and insects. as well as other pests like spider mites. The Burpee company eventually managed to master the process of making F1 hybrids, creating a factory system of mass producing these seeds. Now on to how I reached California. Marigolds first reached California in 1873. After World War I, plants such as sweet peas and asters were on their way out, and so David Burpee recognized that new flower would be taking their place and decided to make it the marigold. In England, and this is strictly related, it was discovered that Tagetes erecta is a diploid while Tagetes patula is a tetraploid, and so triploid hybrids between the two species were developed. This combined the longer flowering season of Tagetes patula with the variation and color scheme of Tagetes erecta. Using this information, the Burpee company decided to begin hybridizing both species as well to breed its own varieties. Now on to the specific breeding companies that tinkered with the marigold species. The first would be the Ball Seed Company, which bought out David Burpee and his Burpee Seed Company, developing the All-American Selection Trials. Still another company was called the Bodgers, the last seed company in Lompoc Valley run by the same family until recently, when it was bought by Ernst Bennery Seeds. Likewise, they bred their own marigold varieties from 1942 to 1977. In 1905, marigolds became a very popular plant within the Burpee company, and as mentioned, one of its marketing strategies was a contest to breed a full snow white marigold. This helped promote the marigold this helped put the marigold into the vacuum that was left behind by the decline of sweet pea and aster. Prior to World War II, the Burpee company bred many different varieties of open pollinated marigolds such as Crown of Gold, Red and Gold, and several others. Red and Gold, for instance, was one of the first interspecific hybrids sold into common commerce, and Nuggets was one of the first triploid marigolds in commerce, and all three listed cultivars, Crown of Gold, Red and Gold, and Nuggets, won gold medals within the All-America Selections contest. Once F1 hybrid breeding became feasible, the Climax series was released in the late 1950s. These were amongst the first tall African cultivars with fully double flowers. This was followed up by the Gold Corn series. Following the All-American Selection Trials, 48 awards over the course of 70 years were released for marigolds, alongside 3 gold medals. The Burpee company won 17 of them. The Crown of Gold was the first scentless form of marigold, since the market research suggested that the strong smell of marigolds was putting people off. It did not work, however, so now an odorous and non-odorous form of that cultivar was bred, and people could choose. Dozens of cultivars were introduced over the years. At this point, there's now over 330 varieties and cultivars of marigold in the Burpee catalog, the most popular of which was Tagetes Orange Ball. Now onto some other breeders. There are a great many breeders involved in this process, and here are just a few of them. Dennis Flaschrim was a breeder at the Pan American Seed Company, breeding different cultivars, especially of Zinnia marigold. Amongst them is the American Taschen marigold. Another individual is Dr. Mafid Holtrup, who worked for Goldsmith Seeds for 28 years. She bred, as her first task, a fully double Tagetes erecta cultivar of a large flower head. A series of cultivars bred from this breeding program was called the Inca series. To further improve this series, one specific cultivar was bred with an F2 derivative of the cultivar First Lily made by the Bodgers Corporation, leading to the creation of T. Inca 2. She also bred the first chrysanthemum-shaped flower marigold called Mariam, as well as a marigold that has a flower the shape of an anemone. This form was called the Aurora series. She also took the remaining work of another breeder, Caroline James, and used to breed her varieties Jane Gold, an award-winning flower. Still another figure is David Lemon, who was a breeder of a great many flowers such as marigold, pelargonium, and sweet pea. And he worked for pretty much everybody, working for Burpee, Delholm, Ball, and Bodger at different time periods, winning countless awards for his crops and varieties. He bred multiple different cultivars of marigolds such as French Honeycomb, French Boy, French Gate, French Bonanza, French Hero, French Little Hero, French Safari, and French Disco, none of which were F1 hybrids. Now on to John Modry. He worked for both Bodger and Burpee. He started off the son of a coal miner, but due to his obsessive work ethic, he obtained a scholarship in college for graduate work, where he worked with the US Navy to breed vegetables between 1943 to 1945 before he entered the Army. He was then employed by Burpee as a desk job position until he obtained an offer from Bodger Seed as a plant breeder, where he began working both on making F1 hybrids for both vegetables and flowers. Due to the discovery of two variants of marigold that had no stamens, and as such could not produce pollen, Dr. Modry took full advantage of this finding by crossbreeding an inbred line into male sterile line until all the genetics were moved from the regular line into its final form. If you want to understand this process, I'll link a video below, made by me, that explains it. If it does not work, I'll upload it to Rumble and put a link to it in the description. Through these male sterile lines, inbred cultivars could be maintained for long periods of time. These could be crossbred with regular inbred lines to breed F1 hybrids very easily. Now on to the last two breeders on our hit list. Elwood S. Pickering was the breeder of several triploid cultivars, including Nugget, the first triploid cultivar of marigold. He worked for Burpee as a plant breeder until he retired. It lived from 1919 to 2004. And our final breeder is Daryl Decker. He was an independent flower breeder in Chula Vista, California. He was the one that bred Sparky. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching.